What is a very interesting or odd psychological phenomena or fact? Jamais-vu, finding something unfamiliar on a subjective level when we know it is familiar on an objective level, for example walking around an area you know from childhood. Basically the opposite of déjà vu. Recently had to go back inside my elementary school I went to for K2nd. I'm 19 now, and man oh man I got this feeling hard. I felt like I should know this place and know my way around, but was completely lost on the inside. The frequency illusion Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. The frequency illusion is when you start noticing something for the first time and suddenly it appears that this something suddenly crops up everywhere. In reality this is not true. A good example is a not currently trending word you heard for the first time. Suddenly you read and hear this word all the time. You mean once you've bought the car, you only start noticing how many of them drive around in your area. Reminds me of my driver's license test. It had a question that was something like, if you drive a red car are you more likely to come across red cars in traffic? Of course I answered false, because it made no sense. The right answer was true, because of his phenomenon. I still think I was right though. If the question was more likely to come across then yeah you're right. But if the question was more likely to notice, then based on the test taker knowing this phenomenon the answer was correctly true. Stupid question all around though. I had a customer who knew that her entire family had been replaced by actors. Those had gone through extensive surgery and training to mimic their body language, way of speaking, and such, while all memories of the relative they replaced had been transferred to them with a chip in the arm. She told me she was a nurse and had witnessed this in other cases. It's really crazy. This actor lives in the house of your relative, looks like him, speaks like him, knows everything that happened 20 years ago. But this isn't your relative. She was 100% convinced of this. Not the smallest doubt. Her main concern was what happened to her real family. Only years later I learned this is called Capgras delusion. I hope she got help and that she could reunite with her family. That must be the saddest syndrome ever. I have also seen people who suffer from Capgras delusions and it's really sad watching family members get yelled at by someone they love. It's truly heartbreaking to have to go through that. Confronting someone with information that is at odds with what their brain is used to stimulates the amygdala in the same way a physical attack does. So telling some old person that what they think the world is like is essentially wrong can be compared to a slap in the face. This can be small things as well. I tried to explain to my father once that people are making money off of YouTubers, content creators, and that idea was so outlandish to him that he got angry and loud. My girlfriend at the time was really confused and scared afterwards. We ran into this while taking care of my grandmother. Once dementia had set in, she kept asking where various family members were. Originally my mother would remind her that person had been dead X years. My grandmother would get angry she wasn't told prior and would grieve all over again. I was in high school and after watching it enough times I would say they were over on whatever street the cemetery they were buried in was on. She'd handle it better, she knew where they were, not why they were there. Was able to get other family members to follow suit. Daily visits became less stressful for everyone involved. Before my dad succumbed to Alzheimer's, he'd talk about his parents a lot. If we were taking him somewhere, he'd say wait I need to tell mom where I'm going, and I'd tell him I already did and said to have a nice time. That always worked and was why better than trying to explain they were gone. Also duck Alzheimer's. Placebo effect is the one that is the strangest to me. It's so wild, like fake thing that causes a real effect. What's even more wild is the placebo effect works on animals, and it works on humans when you tell them they are getting a placebo and show them it's a placebo. It's so weird. There's so much extra stuff on top of a basic placebo effect too. Like uncomfortable bigger placebo interventions work better than less comfortable ones. For example, a jab of saline cures pain more than just a sugar pill. There's also some evidence that red sugar pills are more effective than blue at curing pain via placebo. You mentioned red versus blue. This is clearly hardwired in our brains somehow. To expand on this, in multiplayer matches of the game Halo, you have two teams. One is colored red and the other is blue. After analyzing a lot of random matches from matchmaking, Red had more victories than blue by a fairly significant margin. Also, each team is randomly shuffled and matched together, so it's not like one is more skilled than each other. It's very weird. I think it was like 90% of people believe they are above average intelligence, which would be the 50% mark. The phenomenon has a name, but because I'm the 10% I forgot it. I remember learning in driver's education that a similar percentage of people say that they are good drivers or above average drivers. But of course that's not true. Every driver, except me, is either a lunatic or a moron. There are actually blood vessels obstructing light from reaching certain areas in your eye, effectively creating a shadow. Your brain filters this out and essentially fills in the gaps, so you don't actually see the spider web-like network of black lines. However, you can visualize them by shining a light at a diagonal into your eye, not directly, and gently wiggling it about. This means your brain doesn't have enough time to filter it out, and you see the spider web-like network of blood vessels. Edit. Wow. Waking up to so many people enjoying this neat little trick will put some pep in my step. Thanks for the awards, kind strangers. Also, a bit more detailed instructions to clarify the actions involved. I find it easier to see this effect in a dark environment, so the contrast of the black shadow against the light is higher. You want to be staring straight ahead and shining the light into your pupil at a 45-degree angle from the side directed at your nose. Phone light will be great. Then wiggle the light in gentle 1 cm movements side to side. Keep this up for about a second at least, and you should see them. Hope this clears it up a bit. Here's a diagram of how to flash the light into your eyes. Link. This reminds me of the blind spot trick. So, at the place on your retina where the optic nerve connects, we have no rods or cones. This creates a blind spot. Like in your fun fact, the brain simply fills in this space with whatever is around it. You can find your blind spot by taking a piece of paper about the size of a note card. Draw an X and a dot a couple of inches apart, with the X on the left and the dot on the right. Close your left eye. Focus on the X using only your right eye. You might have to move the paper further away from your face, or maybe closer. Do this slowly, and the dot should disappear from your periphery vision. You can do this with either eye, obviously. Just make sure you are closing the eye that is in the same side as the dot. We did a version of this with a pencil in a sensation and perception class. If you slowly move the tip of the pencil into the blind spot, the tip will disappear just like the dot in your experiment. However, if you keep moving the pencil past the blind spot so that it comes out the other side, your brain will fill in the gap with the rest of the pencil that you shouldn't be able to see. Lots of other cool experiments can be found on Google too. Your brain kind of defrags irrelevant information. If you go on a long, uneventful drive, you might only remember the first and last 10 minutes or something unusual in between, but your brain deems it pointless. Tolerance, value systems, and association. Your brain has a tendency to adjust to certain things. People call this getting used to it or getting comfortable. The reality is desensitization. A good chunk of the time people will think something is normal just because of frequent experience or association with something they are familiar with. In reality it's not that common and can be very wrong. It's actually used to lull people into complacency by easing them into scenario by habit or routine, rather than slow progression. Because the brain uses association for memory or reason, people have a tendency to accommodate things they are familiar with, so the familiarity is used to cause later association. This chain can continue, even though the entire chain of synaptic connects can all be false and take forever to untangle and break down. It's what people mean by caught in someone's web. The neural network of the brain being manipulated in this way is a reason for a lot of disorders and their difficulty in recovery, especially due to bias or the Pygmalion effect. Johari's window is cool too, but I like the dynamic of decision making between acting and thinking too. Edit typus. People can be made to remember things that never happened. Link. This is a large part of what caused the satanic panic. Memory is reconstructive, not recollective, and the memory likely changes a bit each time you reconstruct it. So it's likely that nothing you remember happened the way you remember it happening. Blind sight. Blind people who have an awareness of their surroundings. Their brains still process data from their eyes at a certain level. They just can't consciously see anything. When asking for something big, lead up to it by asking for something inconsequential at first, so the person is likely to say yes, followed by slightly larger requests. Once a person has said yes, they feel obligated to keep saying yes. Salespeople do this a lot. On the other hand, if you want something small, start by asking for something ridiculous. So by comparison, the small thing seems trivial. Salespeople do this a lot, too. Also, people are more inclined to let you do something if you give a reason. The interesting part is that it doesn't really matter what the reason is. For example, asking to cut in front of someone at the checkout. If you ask, "Do you mind if I cut in front of you? I just need to buy these things," will be more effective than just saying, "Do you mind if I cut in front of you?" Even though the reason is irrelevant, everyone is in line because they need to buy things. Brains are weird. For more social psychology facts, subscribe below. Just kidding. Buy a textbook. I'm not a bot. Every time you remember something, the memory changes a little. Fatal familial insomnia FFI. You basically cannot sleep and you go insane as a result until you die. I saw a documentary about that. What's sad is that you can be tested for the anomaly that causes it, and if you test positive, there's nothing you can do about it. Placebos still work if you know they are placebos. The opposite phenomenon is called a nocebo and also exhibits the same effects. Fact 1. It's common for victims of violent crimes to forget key details, even if they saw everything, because their brain is focusing more on how to survive than how to identify the perp. It's rare for prosecutors to have a victim who remembers everything about the perp or the place, which makes the trial difficult because we often assume that victims will remember all the key details. In fact, they are more likely to remember minor details like smells and sounds. Fact 2. If you keep the first and last letter in every word in the same spot, but rearrange the middle letters, your brain can automatically figure out the words. The more money or time or effort on something, the more you will value it, even if it doesn't make sense to do so. This is part of the reason why we hold on to inanimate objects for so long after they lose their original usefulness. It's also how we justify spending so much time, money, effort on things that other people would think aren't worth it. So if you bought a dud of a car, you're more likely to stick with it and make excuses rather than cut your losses and wrestle or get rid of it. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. When I was a little girl lying in bed, I would sometimes feel like I was gigantic, like my body was taking up the entire room, or microscopically small. Winds up, this is an actual thing that happens to a fairly large amount of people, although normally just a few fleeting instances in their lifetime. I don't recall the scientific term with any certainty, but doorway syndrome. Basically, you think of one thing, then walk through a doorway, and it's gone, filed away into matters relevant to the room you just left. This is why you often forget why you just walked into the kitchen. I'm not sure how true this is, but a woman was diagnosed through voices she had heard telling her exactly where to go and where the tumor was. If anything, it's a good read. Link to the story. Link. Tachipsychia. Essentially, under situations of extreme stress, your mind starts processing information at such a high rate of speed that time seems to slow down in your perception. Victims of car crashes experience it. I experienced it during my first firefight in Afghanistan. It was like the entire world was slow motion. Famously, you saw Tom Hanks' character Captain Miller in Saving Private Ryan experience it during the Normandy landing sequence. When you see an image or video of someone sustaining an injury, for example breaking an arm, regions of your brain which are related to pain in that area are stimulated. There have been studies which have shown that our brains begin the mental processes for our action before we have consciously decided to do it. It's a part of an ongoing debate in psychology about our free will. Yelling when injured is an involuntary, evolutionary response designed to alert others to your state and summon aid. The James Lange theory states that we first experience physiological changes and then feel the appropriate emotion. For example, your heart rate increases, Your muscles tense. Then you begin to feel fear, not the other way around. Finally, Bulba's evolutionary theory states that our attitudes towards our own self-worth internal working model are almost entirely related to the frequency with which we had our needs as an infant and toddler met by our caregivers. Further studies, for example Hazen and Shaver's Love Quiz, showed that our attachment styles, Ainsworth's attachment theory, during our time as infants and children influence our attitudes towards romantic relationships. I have SDAM, stands for severely deficient autobiographical memory. I don't know of anyone else who has this condition. And there's only about 2 articles I could find about it on Google. It's non-serious and was not caused by childhood trauma that I'm aware of. I had a safe and fairly loving upbringing. It basically means I lack the ability to revisit any long-term memories. I know that certain things have happened, but I can't go back and watch it in my mind because I didn't store the experience. There are a handful of exceptions, which are mostly recent memories. I had my 21st birthday party 2 years ago, and I don't remember anything that happened during it, but I can see the photos. Seeing photos and videos of myself is super weird because it's like watching someone else because I don't remember doing the thing. This also means I have no perception of my past self, and I don't feel connected to the person I was even a year ago. I know my personality is pretty much the same, but I also know I have changed an awful lot in the last few years, and I think some people think I'm trying to be a different person or something. I'm not. I'm just working solely with my present self and growing how I see fit. It's kind of upsetting that I can't relive most of the good things that have happened to me, but it also gives me a sense of peace because I can't relive the bad things either. That said, I have a very strong imagination, and I've fabricated and made past events in my head to fill in the gaps, even though I don't use those imaginary scenarios for anything. It's very odd. It's frustrating trying to explain this to people, so I no longer try to unless I'm comfortable with and trust them. Most people brush it off and say, well, they're in there somewhere. You just need to find them. No, they're not in there. Nothing is in there, and memory triggers usually do nothing for me. I think a part of it may be because I have ADHD, and for me, it has caused an overactive mind, which takes precedence over what's happening in my physical environment. I think I've spent so much of my life in my head that I just haven't recorded any memories of my experiences. Anyway, that's my psychological anomaly. Terminal lucidity. Terminal lucidity is a term coined by German biologist Michael Mann that refers to an unexpected return of mental clarity and memory, or suddenly regained consciousness, that occurs in the time shortly before death in patients suffering from severe psychiatric or neurological disorders. 1, 2, 3 This condition has been reported by physicians since the 19th century. Link. This one breaks my heart a little bit. Many have noticed loved ones suffering from Alzheimer's return to a normal just before passing. I was reminded of this today. It's possible for the human brain to read an incorrect sentence properly by filtering out excessive words. For instance, there were 2 of the word "the" in the first line,